11:46 p.m. A decaying apartment complex erupts in flames. Liam Walker, a struggling single father, lunges into the suffocating black smoke after hearing a desperate, jagged cough. He breaks down a warped door, using his own body as a living shield to drag a trapped woman through the roaring inferno to safety. Before the sirens fade, he vanishes into the night, seeking no reward. 2 weeks later, desperate for work and facing eviction, Liam enters a high-stakes interview at Etheron Group. The door opens and his heart stops. Sitting at the head of the table is the wealthy woman he saved, a healing burn still visible on her trembling wrist. Life for Liam Walker was a series of quiet, deliberate movements. At 36, his world was small, contained within the four walls of a modest rented apartment and the bright, curious eyes of his 8-year-old son, Noah. Liam was a man built of steady hands and silenced memories. He had once been a brilliant safety systems engineer, the kind of man who understood the skeletal integrity of skyscrapers and the hidden veins of electrical grids. But that was before the accident, the one that wasn't his fault, yet felt like his failure. After a colleague was injured in a localized structural collapse he had predicted but failed to stop, Liam walked away from the high-rises. He chose the shadows, taking odd jobs and manual labor positions just to stay close to Noah, ensuring the boy never had to see his father broken by the weight of corporate responsibility again. He spent his days in a rhythm of humility. Morning was for Noah, packing lunches, checking math homework, and walking the boy to the bus stop with a smile that never quite reached his tired eyes. The afternoons were spent in warehouses or construction sites, where his specialized knowledge was hidden behind a yellow vest and a quiet demeanor. He was overqualified for everything he did, but the lack of responsibility was a comfort. He didn't want to hold lives in his hands anymore. The night of the fire started like any other. They were returning from a late-night grocery run, Noah asleep in the back seat of their old battered sedan. As Liam pulled onto the river road, he smelled it, the acrid, unmistakable scent of burning chemicals. The old Riverstone Heights complex was an eyesore, a victim of years of municipal neglect. Flames were already licking at the peeling gray paint of the third floor. Liam didn't hesitate. He didn't call himself a hero. He just couldn't stomach the thought of someone being left behind in the dark. He parked the car, told a waking Noah to stay locked inside, and ran toward the heat. Inside, the world was orange and black. The air was a thick soup of soot that burned his lungs. He heard her then, a jagged metallic cough. He found her collapsed behind a door that had expanded in its frame, locking her in a private furnace. Liam's coat was his only shield. He kicked the door with a desperate, focused strength, grabbed the woman by her shoulders, and dragged her through the choking corridor. As they moved, the ceiling groaned above them. A beam collapsed and sending a shower of sparks across Liam's back. He didn't flinch. He used his body to shield the woman, his lungs screaming for oxygen. He saw a window of clarity in the chaos, a fire escape that hadn't yet been consumed. By the time they reached the cool night air, the woman was semi-conscious, her face smeared with soot, her expensive suit ruined. Liam handed her off to a paramedic who had just arrived. When the medic asked for his name to file a report, Liam simply adjusted his collar, looked at the flickering fire and said, "Just take care of her first." He disappeared into the crowd before the first news camera could find him. He drove home in silence, his back stinging from the heat, his mind already calculating how to wash the smell of smoke out of his clothes before Noah noticed. The next morning, the local news was filled with stories of the anonymous guardian. The headlines praised a mystery man who had saved a life and vanished. Liam didn't watch the news. He was too busy flipping pancakes for Noah and worrying about the final notice envelope sitting on his kitchen counter. The rent was due. His latest temporary contract had ended. He needed something stable, something that paid enough to keep a roof over Noah's head. He sat at his small kitchen table, scrolling through job boards with a weary sigh. One listing caught his eye. Etheron Group, Infrastructure Management, Safety Operations Specialist. It was a high-level position, far above the odd jobs he'd been doing. Etheron was a titan, a company that managed half the city's commercial assets. He hesitated, his past trauma tugging at his sleeve. But then he looked at Noah, who was drawing a picture of a man with a cape. "Daddy," Noah said, looking up with that uncanny childhood intuition. "The man who saved that lady on the news? He looked like you. He had your jacket." Liam stayed silent for a long moment, then ruffled the boy's hair. "There are a lot of jackets in this city, Noah. Now finish your breakfast." Liam submitted the application that afternoon. He didn't know that the head of the department he was applying to was the woman he had dragged through the smoke. He didn't know that fate was about to pull him out of the shadows and back into the light. All he knew was that he had a son to protect, and the rent was due in 3 days. The Etheron Group headquarters was a monolith of glass and steel, standing at the heart of the financial district like a sentinel. Liam felt out of place as he stepped into the lobby, his only suit, an old but well-kept charcoal wool, feeling slightly tight across his shoulders. He was ushered to the 27th floor, a place where the air felt thinner and the silence was expensive. He was led into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. At the head of the long mahogany table sat 3 people, 2 men in sharp navy suits and a woman. Evelyn Hart, the CEO of Etheron, was 39 and radiated a cold, focused brilliance. She was dressed in a crisp white blouse, but if one looked closely, they could see a faint, reddish mark, a healing burn, trailing down from her wrist toward her palm. When Liam walked in, Evelyn was looking at a file. She looked up to greet the candidate, and the words died in her throat. Her breath hitched, a sharp intake of air that went unnoticed by the other board members, but felt like a thunderclap to her. It was him. The eyes were exactly the same, calm, steady, and deep as a well. She remembered those eyes through the mask of smoke, the only thing she had seen clearly before passing out. Evelyn was a professional. She had clawed her way to the top of a male-dominated industry by being unshakable. She forced her heart to stop racing, masking her shock with a mask of icy indifference. She didn't acknowledge the connection. Instead, she became harder, testing him to see if the man who was a hero in the dark was also a man of substance in the light. The interview was grueling. The 2 men, Marcus and Julian, focused on Liam's gap in his resume, questioning why a man of his caliber had spent years doing odd jobs. They spoke down to him, their voices laced with the arrogance of those who had never seen a structural failure from the inside. "Mr. Walker," Marcus sneered, tapping a gold pen against the table, "you expect us to believe that you just lost interest in high-level engineering? People with your skills don't just disappear unless they're hiding something. Did you crumble under the pressure?" Liam answered with a quiet, dignified honesty. He didn't look at the board members. He looked at the space between them. "I didn't lose interest. I lost my taste for the compromise. I spoke of my need to be a present father. I spoke of my respect for the small details of safety that big corporations often miss because they're too busy looking at the bottom line." Evelyn intervened then. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "You talk about small details, Mr. Walker, but in a high-pressure environment, details are often the first thing to burn. Let's talk about emergencies. Suppose a building is failing. The alarms are screaming. People are trapped. You are the only one who knows the exit is blocked. How do you decide who lives? How do you justify the risk to your own life?" Liam looked her directly in the eye. He didn't know why, but she seemed familiar. Not the face. He hadn't seen her face clearly in the fire. But the presence, the scent of expensive perfume mingled with a phantom hint of smoke. "You don't justify the risk," Liam said softly. "You mitigate it. You don't decide who lives. You decide that no one stays behind. Decisions aren't made with logic in a fire, Ms. Hart. They are made with instinct. And if your instinct is to run out before the last person is accounted for, you shouldn't be in this industry." Julian scoffed. "Spoken like someone who reads too many novels. We deal with insurance, liability, and structural percentages. We need a pragmatist, not a saint." Evelyn remained silent, her eyes locked on Liam. She noticed the way he sat, not like a man begging for a job, but like a man who knew his worth. She noticed the slight tremor in his hand when he spoke of failing systems. He wasn't just an engineer, he was a survivor. She pushed him further, asking about the Riverstone Heights fire, the very building where she had almost died. She wanted to see if he would brag. "That fire last week," she said, her voice dropping. "The media is calling it a miracle that only one person was hospitalized. As a safety expert, what went wrong there?" Liam's face tightened. Everything went wrong. The fire suppression system was outdated. The emergency exits were improperly sealed. Whoever managed that building didn't care about the people inside. They cared about the cost of the upgrade. The interview dragged on for nearly 2 hours. They pushed him on his past, trying to find the crack in his story, the reason he had left his old firm. Liam didn't hide the truth. He told them about the colleague who got hurt. He told them he couldn't live with a system that prioritized speed over safety. "And yet you're here," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Applying for a job at the very company that manages the most high-speed assets in the city? Isn't that hypocritical?" "No," Liam replied. "It's an opportunity to make sure it doesn't happen again." The tension in the room was suffocating. Evelyn stood up, walking to the window. She turned her back to the room, looking out over the city. She could feel the faint sting of the burn on her wrist. She remembered the heat. She remembered the man who didn't ask for her name. "One last question, Mr. Walker," Evelyn said, still looking at the horizon. "Have you ever, in your private life, had to save someone from a fire?" The air in the room seemed to solidify. Liam froze. His mind raced back to the river road, the smell of soot, and the weight of the woman in his arms. He looked at Evelyn's back, then his eyes drifted down to her hands, which were resting on the back of her chair. He saw it, the faint, jagged scar on her wrist, the exact shape of the burn he had tried to shield as they ran through the flaming door. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The room fell into a profound, heavy silence. The two other board members looked between their CEO and the candidate, sensing a shift in the atmosphere they couldn't explain. Marcus looked annoyed, while Julian looked suspicious. Liam exhaled slowly. He had spent years avoiding recognition, avoiding the hero label because he felt he didn't deserve it after his past failure. But here, in this glass cage, the truth was the only currency left. "Yes," Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of a mountain. "I have, but it's not something I wish to discuss in a professional setting. My actions that night have nothing to do with my engineering credentials." Evelyn turned around. Her eyes were shimmering with a mixture of raw emotion and corporate steel. "On the contrary, Mr. Walker, it has everything to do with it." She stepped toward the table, ignoring her colleagues' confused glances. 2 weeks ago, I was trapped in a building that was supposed to be up to code, a building managed by a subsidiary of this very company. I was ready to die. I had accepted it. And then a man appeared. He didn't have a badge. He didn't have a respirator. He just had a jacket and a pair of eyes that told me I was going to be okay. She held up her wrist, showing the scar. "The paramedics told me he vanished. They called him a ghost. But ghosts don't apply for jobs at Etheron Group. They don't have sons named Noah who draw pictures of men in capes." The board members were stunned. Marcus began to stammer. "Evelyn, surely you aren't suggesting that this candidate—" "I'm not suggesting it, Marcus. I'm stating it," Evelyn said, her voice regaining its command. She sat back down, leaning forward, her face inches from Liam's. "Do you know why people burn down houses they build?" "Liam, it wasn't an accident. It was a failure of the exact safety protocols you warned about in your application. I was appointed CEO because the previous leadership was hiding safety violations to protect their stock price. That fire was my welcome to the job present. Twist 2, the building that burned, the Riverstone Heights, was owned by an offshore shell company that was being liquidated by Etheron. The reports Liam had filed years ago at his old firm, the ones that had been ignored, were the exact same warnings that could have prevented the Riverstone fire. I spent the last 10 days digging through our archives," Evelyn continued, her voice trembling with anger. "I found your old memos, Liam. You were the one who flagged the faulty wiring in the Riverstone series 5 years ago. You were silenced, and you were used as a scapegoat when that smaller site collapsed. We didn't just ignore you. This company broke you. We turned a man with a brilliant mind into someone who cleans warehouses." The board members shifted uncomfortably. They realized that the applicant they were mocking wasn't just a hero. He was the man they had legally and professionally wronged years ago. The structural error he had pointed out was now a massive liability that could bring the entire corporation down if exposed. Liam stood up. He wasn't angry. He was tired. "I didn't come here for an apology, Miss Hart. I didn't come here to hold a grudge. I came here for a job. I need to take care of my son." Evelyn looked at the board, then back at Liam. "We don't just need a safety specialist, Liam. We need a conscience. We need someone who isn't afraid to stop the machines when the cost of running them is human life. Marcus, Julian, if you have any objection to hiring the man who saved my life and the man whose warnings we ignored for half a decade, speak now, or forever hold your peace while I sign his contract." Marcus tried to argue about legal implications and admitting fault, but Evelyn shut him down with a single look. "The fault is already admitted by the smoke in my lungs, Marcus. If we don't hire him, he'll be the star witness in the lawsuit that bankrupts us. If we do hire him, he might actually save this company's soul." Silence. The board members knew when they were beaten. They knew that Liam Walker was the only thing standing between Etheron and a catastrophic series of lawsuits. "Welcome back to the industry, Mr. Walker," Evelyn said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, but her hand was still slightly shaking. "But don't think this is going to be easy. We have a lot of buildings to fix, and I expect you to be the most difficult man in this company. I expect you to be a nightmare for every manager who tries to cut a corner." The integration of Liam Walker into the Etheron Group was not a quiet affair. Within 72 hours of his hiring, Evelyn launched a full-scale audit of every property under their management. She didn't hide behind a press release. She stood in front of the cameras and admitted that the company had failed in its duty. She took personal responsibility for the Riverstone fire, and she introduced Liam as the new head of safety infrastructure. Liam's office wasn't a corner suite with a view. He refused it. Instead, he took a space on the 4th floor, right next to the maintenance and engineering crews. He didn't wear a tie. He wore a work shirt with his sleeves rolled up, and he spent more time in the field than in meetings. The transition was difficult. Many of the old guard executives, led by Marcus, tried to sabotage his efforts. They delayed his budget requests, lost his inspection reports, and held secret meetings to undermine his authority. They saw him as a threat to their profit margins. But Liam had something they didn't. He had the absolute, unwavering trust of the CEO. He moved with a quiet, relentless efficiency. He didn't just look at digital blueprints. He went into the basements, he climbed into the elevator shafts, and he inspected the wiring with his own eyes. He listened to the janitors and the security guards, the people who actually knew the building's secrets. He found that the problems were deeper than just wiring. There was a culture of silence that was more dangerous than any fire. "They're afraid to speak up, Evelyn," Liam said during a late-night session in her office. They were surrounded by maps of the city, marked with red pins. "The maintenance guys know the boilers are failing, but their supervisors tell them to patch it and forget it, so the maintenance budget looks good." "Then we change the supervisors," Evelyn replied, her eyes tired but determined. However, the biggest challenge wasn't the buildings. It was his home life. Noah was confused. Suddenly, his dad was wearing nice clothes and coming home later. One evening, after a particularly long day of closing down a faulty mall complex that had been a political minefield, Liam arrived home to find a black luxury SUV parked in front of his apartment. Evelyn Hart was standing on the sidewalk, looking out of place in her designer coat. She wasn't there for a meeting. She was holding a small box of Lego sets. "I realized I hadn't properly thanked the man who saved me," she said, her voice softer than it ever was in the boardroom. "And I wanted to meet the boy who keeps him grounded. I also brought some dinner, because I know your fridge is probably empty." Noah was delighted. He didn't see a powerful CEO. He saw a lady who brought him the ultimate starship set and shared his love for pepperoni pizza. As they sat on the small living room floor, Evelyn watched Liam. She saw the way he spoke to his son, with a tenderness that was the polar opposite of his professional intensity. She realized that Liam wasn't just a hero because he ran into fires. He was a hero because he stood up every day for this boy. "Noah asked me a question," Evelyn said to Liam later that night, as they stood on the small balcony overlooking the river. The air was cool and the city lights danced on the water. He asked if I was going to keep his daddy safe. Liam looked at her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. And what did you say? I told him that his daddy is the one keeping the whole city safe now, she replied. But I also told him that I wouldn't let him face the fire alone anymore. I meant it, Liam, not just as your boss. Liam implemented a new company policy, zero retaliation reporting. Any engineer, from the most senior to the newest intern, could flag a safety concern without fear of losing their job. He changed the bonus structure, tying executive pay to safety ratings instead of just quarterly earnings. Marcus and his cronies were furious. But when the first major inspection revealed a gas leak in a high-rise school that Liam had insisted on checking, their opposition crumbled. Slowly, the culture of Etheron began to shift. The Iron Widow title that people used for Evelyn began to fade, replaced by a reputation for integrity. And Liam, he was no longer the man hiding in the shadows. He was the anchor. At the end of his first year, Liam signed a renewed contract. It contained one special, non-negotiable clause he had insisted upon: the absolute right of refusal. If Liam Walker deemed a system unsafe, he had the legal power to shut it down instantly, regardless of the financial cost. It was a power no other engineer in the country held, and he earned it every single day. 1 year after the fire at Riverstone Heights, the city felt different. The Riverstone series of buildings had been completely retrofitted, and not a single incident had been reported in 12 months. The stock price of Etheron had dipped initially, but it was now stronger than ever, fueled by investor trust in their new, transparent model. Evelyn Hart no longer spent her days locked in a glass office. She was often seen on site, wearing a hard hat and high-visibility vest, walking beside Liam. They were a common sight in the city's industrial sectors, the CEO and her conscience. Noah had become a fixture at the office on Friday afternoons. He had his own small desk in the corner of Liam's room, where he designed buildings made of cardboard and tape. He was no longer the boy waiting for a father to come home from a job he hated. He was the son of a man who was proud of his work. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the skyline, Noah looked up from his drawings. "Daddy, did you save her again today?" Liam laughed, leaning back in his chair. "No, Noah. I think today we just made sure no one else needed saving." Evelyn walked into the office then, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She smiled at Noah and handed a cup to Liam. They stood by the window, watching the city lights begin to flicker on. "I found something in the old storage unit today," Evelyn said quietly. She reached into her bag and pulled out a scorched, tattered jacket. It was the one Liam had used to shield her in the fire. "I had it cleaned. The scars are still there, but the fabric is strong." Liam touched the rough material. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Why did you keep it?" "To remind me," she said, "that the most important things in this world aren't the buildings we build, but the people we pull out of them." Liam realized he wasn't running from his past anymore. He had integrated it into a future where he was finally at peace. He looked at his son, then at the woman who had become his partner in more ways than one. The old jacket was hung on a simple wooden peg in Liam's office. It wasn't a trophy, it was a reminder. A reminder that real heroes don't disappear into the smoke. They just wait for the right moment to come back and finish what they started. As the moon rose over the river, the city was a little safer, the air a little clearer, and a man who had once been a ghost was finally home. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Kind Single Father.